It's good to be here, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. My apologies, my Czech is a bit rusty, that's why I have to speak in English today. How many of you here have ever been to Ireland? There's a lot more Irish people coming to Prague than there are Czechs coming to Dublin, but it's great to be here, and I want to thank the association. We have a connection. Last year, the Fintech Czech Association was in Dublin for a series of workshops organised by your embassy, and I want to thank especially the Czech embassy in Dublin for inviting me here today, but also for the good work that your embassy is doing in Dublin, connecting you with what's going on in Ireland and vice versa. So it's really important that dialogue. I was listening to some of the debate this morning, and all those issues around regulation, partnerships with banks, where is the funding streams going forward? How do we deal with blockchain, AI? Where exactly is digitalization going in Europe? All those issues are exactly the same issues that apply across the European Union right now. Whether you're in the Eurozone or not in the Eurozone, whatever you are in Europe, we have a common approach, and I think we need to debate that. From my background, I was a politician once. I wrote the very first FinTech report in the European Parliament as a member of the Econ Committee, apologies again, 10 years ago. And it's amazing, I was a member of the European Parliament for one term, Vice Chairman of the Econ Committee, and a member of our Parliament, Deputy Finance Minister. And what's amazing is that over such a short period of time, the changes that have emerged in finance. I heard earlier that you have nearly over 6,000 people directly employed here in the Czech Republic, directly on the fintech side. That's an amazing growth story. And I think as we go forward, that adaptation, that change is going to be so important to this industry across the European Union. And two things I'll say that are happening right now that I think are going to make a big difference for this sector and its relationship with the more traditional banking sector. One is there is now a never more important focus on competitiveness in Europe. And to do that, we've got to invest in having a more competitive Europe. So in the famous Draghi report issued last year, he recognized that about 800 billion of investment is needed on the digital side if we're going to make real differences. So that has to be of benefit on a short, medium-term basis to this sector right the way across Europe. But I think the other area that will have to define us as we go forward is in the area of simplification. You're a young industry, but it's nonetheless an industry that is crucially important for European startups, for European VC funding, for European innovation. So it's really important that we get that right as we go forward and we make the right investments and simplify the regulation that we have in place. Because, you know, Asia is known as the continent for emerging finance. The United States is known for its large, deep capital markets. We're known for our regulation, and that has to change. We have to be aware of the funding and the competitiveness story. So they're just two brief remarks on my side. So I was going to give a kind of a story of where we came from, because we were a traditional banking association, and then we developed two associate membership organizations, one for international banks in Ireland, and secondly then for the Fintech and Payment Association. And we're unusual in a sense because most European associations traditionally represent one sector or the other. But it's really important from a banking perspective, wholesale banks and indeed retail banks, that the connections with the fintech sector are there right the way across your development journey. We've discovered in Ireland that many of our banks like to look at what's happening in the fintech sector, either buy out a fintech, partner with a fintech, or are prepared to move forward with the kind of technology that you guys offer. So we've grown really from late 2015, this very important part of our association in trying to represent the emerging fintech sector in Ireland. And if you just look at there, you know, one of the reasons why we've been very fortunate in Ireland is because we have a banking sector that is retail, but is also wholesale. So we have here, in terms of international banks in Ireland, we've over 32 members which come from the international banking sector. And many of those banks who are servicing European clients through Dublin and Ireland, many of those European banks, US banks, or Canadian banks, or now British banks, third country banks, are bringing a lot of investment on innovation to Ireland. And I think we sometimes see the banking sector as one sector. There are many parts to it, and I think the international sector, particularly if you look at the likes of, say, Citibank or State Street, TD Securities, BNY Mellon, Bank of America, these are really big entities that play there. And I suppose of the top 10, you know, internet companies, the Airbnbs, the Metas, the Googles, they're also in Ireland as well. 9 of the top 10 global tech companies, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, Intel, also in Ireland. So we've been lucky because we have the international banks and we've had so many of the digital companies in Ireland. That's been a huge help in terms of building the ecosystem in Ireland and making sure that we have a strong basis for fintech development. We also have lots of Irish startups as well, Irish indigenous startups from, you know, you'd know them as well, Finergo, TransferMate. These companies starting in Ireland, but now servicing a much wider audience across Europe and beyond. Stripe is a very successful US and Irish business as well. But that's the point, I think. We've been fortunate, we've been lucky, because we've had international banking, domestic banking, and the emerging digital players internationally, the really big ones, within Ireland, which is a relatively small country. I have this slide here is what we call Silicon Docks are really the home of financial services in Ireland. It's just as you come up the River Liffey, so as you fly in, you can't miss it. But it's an example of what's kind of transformed in the last 20 years or so in terms of all of the different businesses that you can see there who are located, the JP Morgans of this work, the Credit Suisse, the Citibank, the State Streets, they're all in the same location. And that's created a great opportunity. About 40% of the people who work in banking today in Ireland do not work in what we call pillar banks, they work in international banks. But you can see they're all very much in the same area as well. And then if you overplay that a bit further, a lot of the advisory firms, international advisory firms that you know are well known, are also in the area working with them. I think from a perspective then of the state, what you see in the likes of Facebook or Google or Stripe, Twitter, they're also in the area. And as indeed our support services that we provide from the Irish government and from university. And I think that's a really important point. And I know it was referred to earlier, the importance of the connectivity between the third level, fourth level sector education and making sure that it's connected into the growth of fintechs. So that's very much an ecosystem that is in a small geographical area, but there's great overlaps between all of the various systems there. One of the things that I think we've been successful at doing is creating what we call an international financial services strategy. It's actually coming to an end at the end of this year, and then the government will set out a 5-year plan. And I think it's a good thing where you get what we call Ireland for Finance. And it was really important in that strategy that fintech played such a central part of the strategy. I think the objective over the 5-year plan was to grow employment by about another 10,000 in the sector. There was areas for financial services on funds, on insurance, on banking. But there was a specific area in relation to fintech growth. And we as an organisation were responsible, I suppose, for 3 major parts of that. One on digital assets and seeing the opportunity that comes from crypto and stablecoin developments that we're seeing. We now have, as you know, the MiCAR regulation across the European Union. We have a huge advantage actually over the Americans in this area. Why? Because we have a regulation. I know different member states have to work their way through that regulation, but it's a regulation. Whether you're in a Euro area zone or a non-Euro area zone, it's a regulation about a harmonized approach to how we deal with digital currency. And I think digital assets are the opportunity that we face. So we've been responsible for leading out on that. Also, the opportunities on sustainability for fintech companies and AI, especially within that context, and how I heard RegTech earlier and the opportunities that RegTech plays in trying to understand a diverse landscape where you as a company are working out in 4 or 5 different jurisdictions. RegTech is absolutely central to that. And then open banking. You know, there's PSD2, PSD3 is all the opportunities around open banking. And I think, I suspect there's a view in this room that the banks have not been particularly good at opening up their opportunities. But that certainly is something that we need to focus in on as a sector, collectively, banks, fintechs, how we can use our existing reach across our customer base to advance things like KYC, to advance EID, to make sure that open banking piece is important and got right too. So that strategy, which is coming to an end this year, has made, I think, a bit of a difference in trying to develop the sector. We have here, as you can see, the variety of fintech trends as we see them in Ireland and those fintech companies that have established. A huge number in the payments area. Once, one of the outcomes of the Brexit issue when Britain left the European Union was we saw a very significant rise in payment firm authorizations through our central bank in Ireland. And as you can see there, it represents a very significant percentage, I think, of the fintech new indigenous firms that have been established over the past 5 years. But also things, as I said, like RegTech, insurance, funds and trading, and blockchain especially, and also in the issue of foreign currency. So it gives you an example of the kind of firms that have emerged in the last 5 years in our area. We did a survey at the end of last year across all of the fintech firms that we represent in Ireland. And I was quite astonished by the kind of positivity, and it actually gels with what I was hearing here earlier in terms of your own presentation. You know, 90% of those firms are planning to have new employees, new hires, particularly in the area of sales and marketing. So if you have a good product, you need to sell it, you need to get it to market, and of course, consequently, you need marketeers and salespeople to do that. So that's a really good example of what's happening in the fintech sector in Ireland. People are moving beyond concept, beyond the innovation, beyond the tech and compliance, and moving to the sales part of it, which is critical in terms of any business. I think the other side of it is that the funding gap is recognised, but I think 40% we're seeing funding as an opportunity as we go forward. And also, there was a huge adaptation rate in terms of the access to EU markets, and that's a really favourable point from an Irish fintech perspective as well. I think what's really important is in this entire debate as we go forward is to make sure that we have a really good grasp of where the regulation is right now. There was a discussion earlier on the regulatory sandbox, and we also have examples of that in the Irish example, as is the case here in the Czech Republic. I think the biggest single issue that drives the regulatory community and the fintech community is trying to understand what the business concept is. You know, if you go to the world of banking, the 4 key pillars are capital, liquidity, business, understanding the business model, and governance. And those 2 latter points, I think regulators need to understand what exactly is your business model. Because you're holding money for people, you're transferring money for people in whatever environment you're in. And I think from a consumer protection perspective, it is really important that you have to explain what, in the mind of the regulator, you're doing to protect those consumers as you go forward. So I do think that is a critical area to try to understand and appreciate the regulatory sandbox. And my final remark is this: I think partnerships with existing players is the absolute center of what we all have to do here. There was a time when the fintech community were on one side of the room and the banking community was on the other. That day is over. And there are extraordinary opportunities that we need to foster from ensuring that the relationship and the partnership is stronger. So I hope as you move through your own Fintech Roadmap here in the Czech Republic, and you see the opportunities, particularly of the single market across the European Union, that we can continue the dialogue, that we can continue to see what's happening in each other's jurisdiction, and continuing to see the growth of this really dynamic sector for the future of our entire economy in the European Union. Thank you very much.